It's good. Well, here we are. It's great to be here with lots of familiar faces, people who I've known for, in some cases, many years, and enjoyed your company. It's lovely to be back presenting at the SHPA seminars. I did actually, as I was saying last night, I actually stood up and uttered the very first words at the very first clinical pharmacy seminar in 1991, which wasn't bad for me, being 11 years of age at the time. I thought I did pretty well, you know, so it's pretty amazing. But we wanted to talk a little bit about specialty practice pathways and what it means to be a specialty pharmacy practitioner. And I guess I wanted to open the conversation by asking you folk what it means to be a specialist pharmacist. Anybody want to sort of chip in, give us an idea of what you think? Come on, you put your hand up. What does it mean? Well, I mean, is it because you say you are? Used to be. Used to be enough. You say, oh, well, I specialise in this area, and that was really all it meant at the time. Well, I guess these days we probably want to be a little bit more formal and structured about it than that, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't work in a specialised pharmacy practice setting without necessarily having a formal specialised pharmacy credential. But there are formal structures about the way in which we achieve certification as a pharmacy specialist these days. And show of hands, well actually first of all, show of hands if you actually hold a pharmacy specialist credential. Have now.
Or in the past, let's be nice.
Yeah. So I know for a fact that 5% of all the CGPs in Australia are sitting in this room today.
Now you might want to go backwards to CGP.
We'll come to that in a moment. But basically, I guess what I'm talking about here is the formalised structures for being recognised as a specialist pharmacist practitioner. And you might say to yourself, well, why do I need that? Why would I want to do that? What does it involve? Why is it important? What does it get me? What does it bring me in terms of rewards, in terms of status and standing in the profession? So I want to actually talk you through a little bit about that, but I should acknowledge that in fact the very newest CGP in Australia is also sitting in the room, so well done to that person who knows who she is, but well done. So there are 7 or 8 of you who hold the CGP credential, and I just wanted to explain to you, perhaps we might toggle to that website if that's all right. So how many of you have seen this website? Yeah? So this is about the Certified Geriatric Pharmacy credential. And I think as a starting point, what I need to explain to you is the difference between a certification, a credential, and a qualification. Because there's a lot of confusion about those things. So first of all, a qualification, think of it this way. The simplest way to think about a qualification is what you go to university and study a course of a curriculum and are tested on, sit an exam, and you're granted a degree. That's a qualification. It is yours for life. Doesn't matter what you do thereafter, you will hold that Bachelor of Pharmacy degree or whatever the degree is you've earned from the university forever. It can't be taken away from you, it can't be stripped off you. It is what you have earned as a qualification. It has no time limit on it, and it's about your ability to attend, or in my children's case, not attend their university lectures, and somehow or other still manage to convince their university preceptors that they have understood and digested enough of it and are able to regurgitate it back on a piece of paper. Basically an examination, an assessment of some sort. So that's your Bachelor of Pharmacy or whatever degree you might have. Okay? That's a very different thing to a certification. Now a certification is not about what you've been taught or what you can demonstrate you've learnt, even if only for a short period of time. A certification is about what you can do. It's a way of demonstrating your capabilities, your abilities and your understanding of a particular subject matter and how you are able to apply them in a setting. So to gain a certification like the CGP certification, it's necessary to take a number of steps. One of which is to undergo some sort of assessment which is based around looking at your competency, what you're able to do. So to take a step back from that, you might say, well, how do they work this out? What do they do to get to this point? So the starting point for any of these organisations, including CGP, but there are others that I'll talk about in a little while, is a thing called a role delineation study. So this is where they basically go off and they say, all right, we want to create a specialty practice certification, and in this case, it might be in geriatrics. Okay? There are other areas that we'll talk about briefly in due course. So they say, all right, well, how would we establish, if we wanted to work out what it is that defines a geriatric pharmacy specialist, how would we establish what they need to be able to do? Okay? What they need to know is kind of related and inherent to that, but this is about what they need to be able to do. So what they do is they go off to people who are already doing that job function. Find people who are already practicing at that sophisticated, specialised level that's beyond the basic beginning point of a degree in pharmacy. And they say to those people, what is it that you do with your day? What do you spend your time doing? And when you do that, what elements do you need to know about to be able to deliver that specialised job function? So they map out what these people are actually engaged in doing. And then they say to them, all right, now that we know what you're doing with your practice, then what is it that you need to understand to be able to deliver that specialised practice work? So they develop an assessment. And the assessment is based on a thing called a content map. Okay. So they sit down and draw a map of the things that need to be understood to allow these people to perform the functions that they do as, in this case, geriatric pharmacy specialists. So in the case of the content map for geriatric pharmacy, it basically covers 3 domains. And they're not hard to get your head around. One is obviously domain knowledge that relates to older people. Okay? What do you need to know about older people to be able to deliver your job function as a specialised pharmacist in geriatrics? So that's a people-specific domain. The second thing is about drugs. Okay? So what do you need to know about drugs as they relate to the way they're used in older people? And you can see there's a bit of overlap in that, because sometimes it's the way that drugs are metabolised or the way drugs are disposed in older people. But there are certain functions that you need to understand. And the third domain is about populations and about the way in which these things exist in the world. So, for example, it might be, how do you interpret biomedical literature, which often strikes fear into the heart of people sitting in exams? So they say, oh, it's statistics, I don't know anything about statistics. So you need, the premise is that you can't really be an expert in understanding the way drugs work or interpreting evidence or literature unless you've got a bit of an understanding about the statistics that are used in the way the studies are written and the way that they're published. So these things all sit together. And overlaid on top of that then is the weighting. Of the various different therapeutic areas. So in the case of geriatrics and the geriatric exam, for example, they might say, well, look, we want to make more emphasis of the areas in which older people are most frequently represented. So when you come to the content map of the CCGP exam, you will find that it'll give you relative emphasis. They'll say, these are the big impact areas, these are the moderate impact areas, and these are the low impact areas. So you can expect the majority of the exam to be in the high impact areas a smaller but significant proportion to be in the moderate impact areas, and then a very small proportion to be in the low impact areas. So for example, if I said to you endocrinology, cardiology, musculoskeletal medicine and neuropsychiatry are the high impact areas in the exam. So they account for the majority of the questions. And then there might be other secondary questions that fall into that intermediate category. It might be gastroenterology, for example. It might be something like respiratory medicine. There might be other things like that. And then in the low impact area, you'll find things like oncology, ophthalmology, dermatology. You know, those sorts of things. But again, when you see the questions, and you'll see how this maps out in a moment, the questions they'll ask in those areas won't be to do with bone marrow transplants or, you know, things that are more likely to be seen in a younger population. So it might be, for example, the oncology questions in a CCGP exam might be about chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is the malignancy you're probably going to come across most commonly in an older population. Or it might be about glaucoma, or it might be about rosacea, things that we see in older people. So the emphasis is on the things that you're likely to encounter, and remember, this is something to keep in mind all along about the way this exam works. It's based around the things that you're likely to see and need to deal with in your everyday work as a specialist geriatric pharmacist. They then design the exam, and they design the, around these things here, and they design the criteria that allow you to be able to sit the exam. So in the case of the CGP exam, you need to have at least 2 years experience post-licensure. So that means after you've finished an internship. So you have to have done at least 2 years of experience. Now that's not to be to exclude young people from sitting the exam, but it's basically in recognition of the fact that you need to have spent a little bit of time in the functional workforce before you can lay claim to being a specialist. That's the bottom line. So they'll say 2 years of post-licensure experience. You need to commit to a CPD program to say, I'm going to continue to be involved in the CPD program. And then you apply to sit the exam. Okay? And the exam is a 150 item exam conducted over 3 hours. This is about where people start to get shaking. That sort of starts to strike terror into their hearts, and they think, I don't really want to do this. And really, what would happen if I fail? Well, you know what? If you failed, and it's unlikely, the sun will come up tomorrow, the birds will sing, no one died. You know, no one will tell anybody, and you'll just go around. You know, you'll just go around and you'll decide, do I want to give it another go? You know? It's a 150 item exam conducted over 3 hours. What you may not know is actually only 140 items are marked, because the other 10 are being tested. They actually test the performance of the items. So in fact, and I want to talk to you a little bit, because this is confusing for people who are contemplating the exam, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the relationships between the different organisations that are involved in completing the exam. So 10 of the 150 items are undergoing testing to see whether they reliably perform, to see whether they are psychometrically valid. In other words, whether they are able to discern knowledge. Okay? So what they'll do after the exam is they'll look at these 10 items that are not active items, and they'll decide whether to retire them or elevate them. And if they decide to elevate them, they will be included in future exams, or they may throw them out because they're irretrievable. Okay? The way these exams are written, and it's an eye-opener, let me tell you, and Stefan I'm sure would agree, that if you're ever involved with, and I've sat on the board that writes the questions, and it's an eye-opener to see how much work goes into creating a good multiple choice question. It's, because there's a lot of bad multiple choice questions out there in exams. And I have to say, and I'll put my hand up as a person who works at a university and say universities are rubbish at it, writing good MCQs. They're not good at it. And basically they're not designed properly. But the thing is, At the end of the day, what they'll do is they'll take those 10 questions and they'll say, all right, I want to know of the people who did well on the exam overall, but who failed to answer those 10 questions correctly, why did those people who otherwise did well in the exam not get these questions right? And they do the other way. They say, of the people who did dismal in the exam, there's some questions, even though that people who did dismally in the exam got these questions right. How come they got them right? Why were these exam questions not performing correctly? And sometimes it's quite easy to diagnose. You can see that there's a problem with the stem or the distractor, or, for example, a distractor may not be plausible enough to actually serve as a proper distractor. On the other hand, the question might be so Byzantine and complicated you spend 20 minutes reading it and you still can't understand what it's supposed to be driving at. So those questions don't make it into the counting part of the exam. Just so you know, the questions in the CGP exam are 3 alternative MCQs, not 4. So there are 3 answers and only 1 is correct. Okay. And the interesting thing is that with those 3 answers, you will usually get to a point where you can say, that one is clearly not right, these 2 could be right, this one is more right than that one. That's the way you end up with working through these exam questions. It's not trying to trick you up. No one's asking you questions that they're trying to fool you with. In fact, that's regarded as a bad question in the exam. A question that's trying to be tricky and make you fail to answer the correct answer just because you haven't read it properly is a poorly constructed question. The question we're looking for is the question that truly discerns your understanding of the issue and allows you to make a judgment. Are you following me so far? Okay. 5 questions in the exam. No, there's 150 questions in the 5 minutes. So the other thing is these exam questions test different types of knowledge as well. So you'll get what they call the recall questions. So the recall questions are exactly what they sound like. You either know the answer or you don't know the answer. Okay? So they'll say, which of the following drugs are associated with significant pulmonary toxicity? A, amoxicillin, B, allopurinol, C, amiodarone. You either know it's amiodarone or you don't. So it's a simple recall question. The next type of question is what they call application. So it might be, for example, a person is admitted to an aged care facility on this group of drugs and is found to have SIADH. And so you have to look down that list of drugs and work out which of the drugs is the one that's going to be SIADH. A step further than that is interpretation, where they say a person is admitted to the facility and they have this set of results, okay, and one of them happens to be a sodium of 120. So you actually have to know that that's a low sodium, and you have to know it's a significantly low sodium, and then you need to know which of the drugs cause the low sodium. So you can see it's not a slapdash way of going about things. It's very carefully constructed, very carefully designed to pick the people who are practicing as specialists in this area. So this is the CCGP exam. When you sit the exam, you become certified, you pay a certification fee. Most people choose to pay it straight up front. Okay? People often ask, how do I prepare for this, to sit this exam? I recommend there's 2 ways of doing it. If you go on here into resources up there, maybe I'll use this. There we go. You'll be able to look for a thing called the self-assessment exam. The self-assessment exam is actually a trial exam, and it allows you to download this. It costs about $85 US to download the self-assessment exam, and basically what it allows you to do, and what I recommend to people to do if you're interested in this, is to download the exam, take yourself off somewhere quiet. For God's sake, put your AMH away. You can live without it, I promise you. The world will not stop turning if you don't have an AMH in there, right? And sit there and do the exam as if you're going to do the exam in a classroom, okay? So allow yourself 3 hours, no more. Don't talk to anybody, don't phone a friend, don't look at your AMH, and complete the exam as you would have done it in a classroom. Submit it, and what they will then do is send you back a score that says your score is X out of 150, and on the basis of this you would have passed the exam, or you would have not told anybody what the result was. Now, not only do they do that, but they, for each question they'll say, this is the correct answer, and this is why that answer is correct. This answer is incorrect, this is why it's incorrect, and this answer is potentially harmful, and this is why it would be potentially harmful. The good thing about that is, A, when you do it, you will find that you do better than you expect to do. Universally, people undersell their abilities and their understanding. If you're working in geriatrics, you know more of this stuff than you think you know. That's the first thing to say. So it gives you a confidence boost. You feel better about yourself at that moment for starters. Okay? The next thing is you can see, it tells you the areas in which you're stronger and the areas in which you're not as strong. So if you know, if you get, if there are 20 questions about neuropsychiatry and you get 19 of them right, not much point spending a lot of time swatting up on neuropsychiatry. Whereas if you get 5 out of 20 in musculoskeletal pathology correct, that's sending you a message saying you need to brush up in this area. Okay? So that's the value of that self-assessment exam. The other thing I should just mention briefly is the ASCP, American Society of Consultant Pharmacists website. They have online modular preparation materials that help you prepare for the CCGP exam. So they're written by content experts in these areas, so you can purchase them one by one if you wish. Okay, so you can see, all right, I need to brush up on diabetes. So you buy the diabetes module. So it's a series of slides with some instructional content, and sometimes they'll have somebody droning on an American accent in the background. But basically, they're not worthless. They actually have some value, and I'd suggest you look at those sorts of things. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide when you're ready to sit the exams. Okay? They offer several testing periods per year, and when you think you're ready to go, that's when you put your hand up. It's the YMCA. Okay, I'm getting the wind up here. But so the bottom line is when you think you're ready to sit the exam, you can register for the exam, and the exam is now offered in Australia. You don't have to do what I did and put yourself on a plane and take yourself to the US. When I sat the exam in 1999, I was terrified, basically. I was the most over-prepared candidate that exam had ever seen. Actually, I think I got one question wrong. But basically, the truth is known, I probably knew enough to pass it without even studying, because that's the nature of this. It discerns the person who's working in the industry, who's working in the role. So it's not about studying, it's about recognition of your abilities in that role. So you can sit the exam in Australia. Once you've sat the exam and you've passed, you have the ability to use the CGP credential. Hands up who's got the CGP in the room. You can see it's not uncommon, There are about 140 CGPs in Australia. There are 2,800 in the world. So basically, we are the third largest group. The USA is the largest. Canada is the second largest. We are the third largest group in the world of people who hold the CGP credential. But it identifies you objectively to other people as a person who's a specialist practitioner in this area. It positions you as somebody who's achieved that result and can basically honestly put your hand on your heart and say, I really am a specialist in the area. I mean, I have satisfied the criteria to show that I am a specialist in this area. There are others. If you could just toggle that website for me, please. That's the Board of Pharmaceutical Specialties website. They also offer a series of certifications. They have one that's called the Board Certified Pharmacotherapy Specialist, BCPS. That's kind of analogous to internal medicine. There's BCOP, which is oncology. There's BCPP, which is the one I did in psychiatry. They have one in radiation and nuclear pharmacy, nutrition support pharmacy. I think there's one in ambulatory care now. There are a couple of others coming. I think there's a paediatrics one coming and an ICU one as well. Again, this is all the same process that I described with CGP are exactly the same as what's used here. And very similar. Their period of certification lasts for 7 years, CGP is 5 years. Just before, and I won't go too much longer, but just before I finish, just to talk about what happens after 5 years, because that's the other difference with a certification versus a qualification. Qualification lasts forever. Certification lasts for the time limit of the certification. So in the CGP case, it's 5 years. In the BPS case, it's 7 years. So when you get to the end, you have a choice to make. You can either let your certification lapse, and I hope you wouldn't do that, or you can recertify. There are two ways to recertify. There is recertification by exam, and if you're like Stefan and I and you're lazy, that's what you do. You just turn up and sit the exam again. That's all I've ever done every 5 years since I first got it. On the other hand, if you're not the kind of person who enjoys exams or really would rather avoid them, you can recertify by professional development. So there are approved courses of CPD that you can do and accumulate in the case of CGP, it's 75 hours of approved CPD over 5 years. Doesn't have to be live content, and it can be live content. So if you happen to be going to the USA where most of the live content is offered, you can go and sit in a weekend like this and get approved, 20 hours credit, for example. You also can get credit for writing exam questions. So you can volunteer your service in writing exam questions, and you can actually get approved credit for writing exam questions. And then there are online courses you can get approved credit for as well. Stefan's involved in the exam development. No, you're in the professional development committee, which is the one that actually governs what will be recognised for professional development. Stefan and I have both been on the exam development committee with the people who write the exam. Just before I finish, just to also, for those of you who haven't sit the exam, we do make an effort to make sure that it's not US specific content. People often think, is this an American exam? Is it going to be relevant to Australia? Is it going to be talking about a whole lot of things I've never seen or heard of? And we make a special effort to make sure, people say, do you Australianise the exam? And the answer is no, you don't do that, you de-USify it. So you have to tell them, Tylenol, I mean, and people say, well, what about these funny drug names? And I say to people, look, if you've learnt to this stage of your career and you don't know that acetaminophen is paracetamol, there's no hope for you, really, quite frankly. If you haven't worked out that albuterol and salbutamol are the same thing, well, you know what I'm trying to say, So don't stress about it. You still, to be honest with you, one or two sneak through to the keeper. Okay, so you will find one or two questions in a typical exam where, despite our best efforts, someone's managed to put in something in there. You know what? Take it on the chin, make an educated guess, get on with it. Okay, you're going to be all right. So I encourage you very much to think about this certification process. It's achievable. It does objectively position you as a specialist practitioner in geriatrics. It is the basis for the SHPA pathway to accreditation to provide medication review services, which is a lot cheaper and a lot simpler than the AACP one. So I think about it from that point of view as well. But the other thing is to consider the intangible things that it opens up for you. People say, well, I'm not going to get paid anymore to hold this qualification. There's no formal recognition of this in my career structure to hold this qualification. There might not be, but let me tell you, it's going to open doors for you over the years. It'll give you opportunities you wouldn't otherwise have. So on that note, are there any questions about the certification process I've been describing today?
What's the pass mark?
The pass mark doesn't exist. It's a scaled pass mark. So for those of you who may not have heard, what's the pass mark? It varies in the order of the high 60s to the early 70%. That's what you need to do. If you get north of 72%, it's very unlikely you're going to fail the exam, in my experience over the years. Any other questions?
Where is it sat in Australia?
It can be in any capital city in Australia, and in fact some regional cities as well. I'm told, in fact, it can be sat anywhere there's an H&R Block office. Because they actually, it's a computer-based exam. It's not a pen and paper exam. So that basically they have what they call an invigilator, which sounds kind of rude, doesn't it? Sitting around invigilating in the background.
I think we're called proctors, Chris.
Proctor.
Proctors.
If you don't stop invigilating, you'll go blind. So you have an invigilator standing there supervising you, and you basically log in and it's live. You complete the exam and then you press the button and it sends your answers off into the ether to a group called AMP, Applied Measurement Professionals, who are the group who administer the exam on behalf of all the... And they administer exams for everybody from, respiratory technicians to funeral directors. So basically their business is just the exam, designing and delivering the exam, not the content. They rely on other people to deliver the content. So it can be anywhere. One or two last questions?
You told us the cost of doing the trial exam. What's the cost of the actual exam itself?
So the exam is $600 to sit, and the certification fee is $50 per annum over the 5 years. A lot of people choose to pay it up front because you get a discount for paying it up front.
Did you get a discount for a second exam if you failed the first one?
You do.
Okay.
I think the second one might be $350 US. Yeah. You won't need that. Any other questions? What's your favourite colour? What's
Does
the
that mean that you are an accredited pharmacist for 5 years, or you still have to do other things?
You then go through the SHPA process for accredited to get your accreditation, which is relatively simple. You basically fill out a one-page form, pay them a one-off fee of $100, I think, or $110, and commit to a CPD program, and you actually have to show evidence each year that you have completed your
5 years.
5 years.
Oh, that's better than the
Seriously, and the other thing is you can hold your head up. You can actually say, I have satisfied an international standard here. I'm as good as what there is going around. It's not Mickey Mouse, it's the real McCoy.
I think the thing with the CPD stuff as well is that we're trying to incorporate these seminars as our face-to-face components of the professional development program. And if you do it not by exam recertification, the way the committee spends lots of time deciding on how to apportion it, because one of the things that they say people might do is do nothing for 4 years and then do everything in the last year, or do everything in the first year. So by the time they come to the 5 years, their knowledge is irrelevant, because it's the one thing that we all know is that one day we're up to date and one study comes out and then it's finished. Everything we said yesterday is wrong. Or not quite right. Probably not wrong, but not quite right anymore. So we're trying to put that into the process as well.